Welcome back to our channel, dear viewers. A harsh reality is now crashing down on Eva, a young woman whose entire existence, identity, and sense of belonging are being brutally uprooted by a secret so profound that it threatens to destroy everyone in its path. If Eva weren't Ted's daughter, would she be able to accept this shocking truth? Note, this content is for informational purposes only. Thank you for your interest. Not every storm begins with thunder. Some storms originate from a tiny crack in averted gaze, an unfinished sentence, a misplaced feeling deliberately ignored. And as it grows, as the truth begins to leak through the gaps in lies built up over time, it not only shatters a relationship, but crushes a belief that once formed the foundation of a life. Eva never imagined she would be at the center of that storm. She believed her family wasn't perfect, but it was sincere enough to be free of destructive secrets. She believed in the image of a controlling yet loving mother, a father who was sometimes distant but always present. Those things, though imperfect, formed a structure strong enough for her to rely on. And so, when doubt began to creep in, it didn't come as a direct blow, but as a chilling sensation running down her spine, uncomfortable, yet unnameable. Darelen wasn't the one destroying Eva's trust. She was merely pulling back the decaying curtain, letting in the light. But that light didn't bring clarity. It exposed a reality Eva was unprepared to face. The truth about paternity, that Ted might not be her biological father, was more than just information. It was a cut into her memory, forcing Eva to look back at every moment of the past from a completely different perspective. The hugs, the words of encouragement, the acts of protection all suddenly seemed fragile, as if changing one fact would shatter their entire meaning. But what angered Eva wasn't the possibility of being deceived. It was the feeling of being excluded from the truth. That all those years, she wasn't someone trusted to know. That another story had existed parallel to her own, a story she'd never been allowed to enter. That anger didn't erupt immediately. It built up, silently but fiercely, like water rising behind a dam. And when Eva confronted Leslie, it was no longer a mother-daughter conversation. It was a clash of two worlds: on one side the need to know the truth, on the other the fear of facing its consequences. Leslie wasn't a cruel mother, but she was a woman who had made a choice. And that choice, over time, had become a dense web of lies rationalized by love. In Leslie's mind, concealment wasn't betrayal, it was protection. Protecting a family from falling apart, protecting a man from being hurt, and above all, protecting herself from having to confront a past she never truly dealt with. But the problem with lies constructed for good purposes is that they don't disappear. They wait, and when exposed, they carry the weight of all the years buried. Eva saw it, not through words, but through Leslie's unconcealed panic. A fear not simply of being discovered, but of being stripped of control. Because if the truth were told, Leslie would no longer be the one deciding the story. She would become a part of it, and perhaps the most judgmental part. The tension between them wasn't just a generational conflict. It was a power struggle. Who had the right to define truth? Who had the right to decide what should be known and when? Meanwhile, Darelen wasn't a bystander. She wasn't simply a whistleblower. She had motives. And those motives weren't entirely pure. The relationship between Eva and Isaiah wasn't a minor detail. It was a crucial link. If Eva truly wasn't related to Ted by blood, that could completely alter her perspective on her place within the network of relationships. And if Darelen believed that relationship threatened her family's interests, bringing the truth to light might be a strategy, not an act of selflessness. This pushed Eva into a cruel dilemma. If she believed Darelen, she had to accept that her mother had deceived her entire life. If she believed Leslie, she had to accept that she might be being manipulated to avoid an even more unpleasant truth. There was no choice without pain. In her moments alone, that internal conflict became clearer than ever. Eva wasn't just searching for the truth. She was trying to hold onto a part of herself, a part built on faith in her family. But every question she asked, every detail she began to doubt, then that part. A thought began to emerge, small at first, but increasingly clear. Perhaps the truth wasn't what would set her free. Perhaps it was what would take away everything she was trying to hold on to. And that's when a dangerous choice formed. Silence. Not giving up, but controlling. By not digging deeper, Eva could maintain her relationship with Ted as it once was, even with the cracks in it. She could continue calling him father without having to face the question of whether that was still true. But silence is also a form of betrayal, not just to the truth, but to herself. Leslie, in her fear, began to tighten her grip. She tried to restore order, control relationships, and limit outside influences. But each act of control only made Eva feel more suffocated and reinforced her suspicion that something bigger was being hidden. One secret led to another, and in that darkness, conspiracies began to take shape. There might be someone else involved. Perhaps the truth about Eva's biological father wasn't just a personal story, but involved interests and relationships that, if exposed, would shake the positions of many. This transformed the story from a family tragedy into a power struggle. Eva, against her will, became the center of that struggle. Every decision she makes to believe or not to believe, to speak or to remain silent, can trigger a chain reaction she cannot control. And in that world, where love and truth no longer go hand in hand, the most important question is not who is right or who is wrong. The more Eva struggled to maintain her balance, the more she realized the ground beneath her feet was no longer as firm as before. What had once been her anchors, family, memories, love, now became disjointed pieces, no longer fitting together. And what exhausted her wasn't the struggle to uncover the truth, but the struggle to live with the conflicting possibilities that coexisted simultaneously. She began to observe more, speak less, no more impulsive reactions, no more direct questions. Eva's silence wasn't a sign of recovery, but a form of accumulation, a process of gathering, organizing, and waiting for the right moment. It was the only way she wouldn't be completely swept away. But this change didn't escape Leslie's notice. A mother accustomed to control will recognize immediately when she's no longer in control. Leslie sensed the distance forming, not a physical distance, but an invisible wall between her and her daughter. And the most terrifying thing wasn't Eva's anger, but her coldness. That coldness carried a clear message. Trust had been withdrawn. Leslie began to react in the way she always did when threatened, tightening her grip on everything. She controlled information, limited meetings, and silently monitored Eva's every move. In her mind, if she could isolate the source of interference, everything would go back to normal. But she underestimated the extent of the change in her daughter. Eva was no longer someone who needed protection. She became proactive, albeit silently. And it was this unspoken proactiveness that made the situation more dangerous than ever. On the other side, Darlene didn't stop. Once she had sown the seed, she understood that she needed to continue nurturing it. But instead of offering more information, she chose to create pressure situations that forced Eva to question herself, forcing Leslie to reveal uncontrolled reactions. It was no longer a revelation. It was a strategy. Darlene understood one thing: the truth, if stated directly, could be denied. But if it was revealed through contradictions, inaccuracies, and inconsistent details, it became inevitable. And she began to push things to the limit. Vague information about Leslie's past surfaced at the right time and place. People she had known, old relationships, periods of time that had never been mentioned, all began to be recalled, incomplete, but enough to form a missing picture that Eva could not ignore. The pressure wasn't just on Eva. It began to suffocate Leslie. Leslie had no time to think things through. She reacted instinctively: denial, avoidance, then anger. But each reaction revealed a further piece of the truth she was trying to conceal. Leslie's biggest mistake at this point was beginning to see Eva as a threat rather than a child to be kept. And when a mother shifts from protective to confrontational, the relationship becomes almost irreparable. Meanwhile, Eva gradually realizes that this story isn't just about her. What she's uncovering may involve many more people with status, power, and reasons to keep the past secret. This completely changes how she sees the situation. If before, she only wanted to know the truth to understand who she was, now she begins to understand that the truth might be just one piece of a larger picture, a picture that, if complete, would shake not only her family, but the structures around it. And that's when the real fear emerges. Not the fear of being hurt. It was the fear that she had gone too deep, to the point of no return. The thought of stopping keeping everything at a level of doubt, not confirming, not digging deeper became more appealing than ever. It offered a kind of false security, but enough to breathe. But at the same time, another part of her resisted. That part refused to live in lies, refused to accept others deciding the truth for her. And even more so, refused to accept love being used as an excuse to conceal something. This internal conflict couldn't last forever. A decision had to be made. Either she continued to dig deeper, accepting that everything could fall apart completely, or she stopped holding onto what she could and learning to live with the void. But whichever path she chose, Eva understood one thing. The person she once was no longer existed. Somewhere in the process, she had changed. And perhaps that is the greatest price of truth. Not what it takes away, but what it transforms us into.